Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of SaaS Leaders Lounge. And today we have a very special guest, Shane James, who's been there and done it all in the software space. Shane, I'd love for you just to give an introduction into your career and we can dive into some of the early successes you've had.
Sure. Thanks a lot. And I appreciate everyone's time today. I'm very excited to be here. And I will say, kind of looking at a career perspective, I've been in software for a really long time. And when I say a long time, it's almost 30 years now. And you learn a lot over the years. You make a lot of mistakes, and you also have hopefully, a lot of successes. So kind of looking at where I am, I'm a senior vice president of a software company where I focus really on something around managing the customer experience. One of the most difficult things today that companies are facing is how do you manage a customer experience and dealing with customers and making them successful in a time when the economy is really tough and things are much more challenging than they've ever been before.
And your role leading customer experience and customer success as it is, how would you say it's grown the importance of reducing customer acquisition costs and making sure that there's a long-lasting relationship to bring additional value there?
Yeah, good question. And really comes down to the model of software has changed. So when I was the first in software, almost everyone purchased what they call perpetual-based software license. And what that means is you bought the software and you owned it, and then you paid a percentage of the software's fee annually for maintenance and support. So let's say, for example, you spend $1 million on a software package. You own that software. If you never want to do anything with that software again, like upgrade it or have it maintained, you can use that software for as long as you like. But to have the company that created the software, there's a 20 or 22% fee that they will charge annually for you to continue getting upgrades, security patches, and the things that you need to make it functional. That model is no longer. There's very few companies using this model. They all went to subscription-based model. So you've heard of SaaS, right, Paris? SaaS is really what it's focused around. Is the SaaS models are really nothing more than a subscription-based model. And it's very important. And this is where customer success plays a huge role. If you think about a customer no longer owns that software. They're basically renting that software from you as a vendor. But here's the bad part about that is in a year or however long the contract is with that customer, if they decide they don't want to renew with you, they simply don't renew and you lose all of your revenue. So if you don't have a great customer success organization that's embedded with your customer and working with them to show them value, to show them ways to increase the usage of the software, you will fail. And that's why the customer success and the customer experience is more important today than it ever has historically been.
And on that piece of bringing value to the customers, then what my question next is really about is if we look at in the beginning stages where you're understanding the customer's needs, we talk about pre-sales and sales, kind of going through that with the customer, understanding what they're trying to achieve and helping them on that journey. How are you guys able to build those strong relationships and then start to understand the opportunity to cross-sell and upsell for the customers? Because ultimately, this is where, that revenue stream starts to grow, but more importantly, the understanding behind how their needs are changing and you're able to realize them and take that step with them.
Yeah, good question. And again, another good question. And it really starts with the pre-sales or before the customer even becomes a customer. So during the pre-sales process in most B2B software, there's a proof of value or proof of concept that takes place. During this process, you'll have pre-sales engineers and the account executives working to try to close that business. A good CS organization has someone such as a CSM or a deployment engineer, or depends on the model that you put together in your CS organization. That person should be involved during the initial phase of the POV. And the reason is they want to make sure you want to make sure that software can really accomplish what we show during the sales cycle. Because there's a huge gap sometimes between what an account executive and a sales engineer shows a customer and what they expect and what they're really wanting. And this only happens, there's a lot of reasons it can happen, there's nothing malicious about this process. But the real world deployments that have to take place of that software, in other words, make it functional for customers, that really changes everything, because now you have to make sure you get in front of that. So having that CS person start that relationship before they're even a customer is really fundamental to the success. Now, let's think about the life the lifetime value of a customer, which is about 7 years in our software industry is the average. So in other words, what is your payback? It takes your what they call CAC, and that's your customer acquisition cost. You want to keep that relatively low. And the reason is the more money you spend up front, you have to have that customer longer to keep them. So what do you do during that cycle is really fundamentally important. So day one starts at the POV, but the real success, or the way to create success, is to plan ahead of time and make sure that after the close of that sale and that now they are a customer, how are you going to treat them? What's it going to look like during deployment? How are you going to do training? And what is the process to ongoing to extend that value? If you expect to upsell them or cross-sell them, you first have to make them successful with what they bought. This happens all the time. People sell software and then they'll go a year and they'll not even contact the customer because they don't recognize that this can't just be a point in time. A renewal is not the goal. A lot of people say, hey, we got to get to the next renewal. That's just to save the customer. But if you really think about them as a 7-year customer and not a 1-year customer, the end goal is to keep them for 7 years minimum. Your goal should extend to the 7-year mark and say, what can I do between now and the next 7 years to keep that customer? And the renewal just happens annually or every contract renewal period. Irregardless, it shouldn't even be a thought. It should just happen. If you're integrating yourself into their value chain, if they see the value in your software, and if they're able to quantify how much they spend against how much value they're getting, that CFO or CIO will renew the contract. It's not a conversation that even has to happen if it's done correctly.
And when we look at the cost of customer acquisition, for example, to try and combat that, are you trying to implement a monthly or quarterly or biannual kind of review with the customers to see where they're at and how they're using the software, they're leveraging the full capabilities and what they maybe want to see in terms of product feature improvements?
Yeah, good question. And this really comes down to the kind of customer it is. So you have to segment your customer base. There is no such thing as one customer or all customers are treated equally. As much as we would love to do that, it's not possible. It's not possible with the amount of resources that companies have. So the very first step is to segment your customer base and decide on how many touch points, what we call touch points, which is basically how often you interact with your customer to create success or to help them create and show more value. That's really based upon several things. When I create segmentation, I look at things of the size of the annual reoccurring revenue, the ARR. I also look at things like what's their upsell and cross-sell potential, what vertical they're in, what expertise they have on staff. And there's a whole set of metrics that I look at. And based upon all of these metrics, I'll put them in the specific segment. Once they're in that segment, then I assign the right touch points for that segment of business. So in many cases, a minimum touch point for any high touch customer is going to be minimum one monthly, preferably biweekly and sometimes weekly. But during implementation or deployment phase, it should be almost daily. Because during a deployment, at the end of each day, or at least twice a week, you should be sending out status reports so they know where they are. And also once a month, you should send out and show all the wins you had, the challenges you faced, the people that were involved, and any usage statistics that you have. The customers should be seeing what value they're getting every month. And here's one of the problems, Paris, that I see that happens often, is a lot of customers, a lot of vendors, when they go to do this, it's another one of those things that they just go through the motion. Here's a status report, but they don't look at what a status report needs to mean. It needs to have a lot in it. And it's not about the quantity of data in it. When I say a lot, it has to have a lot of value. Have you really thought about what you've done over the last 30 days for that customer or whatever time period? And have you thought about what you're going to do over the next 30 days with that customer? And this is why you also not only have the status reports, you have to have the touch point phone calls. You've got to get on the call with the owners, the buyers. You've got to get on with the users. You got to get on with the engineers that manage the software. They got to be different kinds of calls. They all have different agendas. They all have different purposes. So it takes a lot to be a good CS person. To understand, you've got to understand your customer's experience. Put yourself in their shoes. How are you experiencing the software? How do you think they're experiencing it? If you don't know that, then you need to dig deeper and to understand the value, because you can't sell more of something if they don't know what value they're getting today.
When you look at your time in a large organization like Oracle, and you now look at your time at Mantis, very different sizes, organizational, and if we look at the scope to be able to react to the different customers' needs, I guess when you have a larger team, you've got more resources to be able to, go with the all fits one or a very specific, use case for each customer. How important is having the right resources to be able to manage those customer needs?
Good question again. And the answer is it's very important. But there's kind of two ways of looking at this. When you work at a company like Oracle, a very large company, you do have more resources. But even at Oracle, sometimes we take the perspective of, oh, Oracle has 150,000 people. We have a big resource pool to choose from. But divisionally, when you break it down per division, every division of every company, Oracle's a very efficient company, first and foremost, very efficient the way they do everything. So they don't have wasteful resources just sitting around, making things easy for everyone else. Every person's there has to be very good at what they do, and they have to create the value that the company expects. So now take that in context of, yes, it's a big company, but if you break it down to your division has just the right amount of people. It's not about the quantity of people. It's about making sure you have the right kind of people working for you. And that doesn't matter if it's a smaller company, a startup. It doesn't matter if it's the size of Oracle. It's the same thing that goes on. Now, there are some examples, within Oracle where maybe, people get lost in the shuffle. Things like this happen. But in general, the process is the same, Paris. People, you're expected to know what you're doing. You're expected to function every day and have a good time doing it. I mean, if you're having fun, if you're passionate, this is not a job. These are not jobs. This is part of this. Almost as you spend a third of your life doing this. You should absolutely enjoy what you're doing. If you're not in IT, if you're not in sales, if you're not in CS because you enjoy it, you should leave because you'll never be successful doing this. When you look at things like these small companies like Manta or large companies like Oracle, at the end of the day, these are all people that have expertise in what they do. These people come from all kinds of size companies to even come to to go back and forth. IT is a small community of people if you really look at it, oddly enough. They move around from company to company. So it's very important to become an expert at what you're doing. Focus on it. Be methodical. Solve the problems that are in front of you and use the resources you have available, but don't leverage other people constantly. Learn to understand what problem you're trying to fix, then use the right resources at the right time.
Amazing. And you studied at Purdue, and then got into IT from an early age, and really had a passion for entrepreneurship. And I'd love just to dive a little bit deeper into how that came about, and where that idea came. You had that eureka moment where you thought, I'm onto something here, the gem, something that I really want to, drive. And where did that come from? What was the biggest challenges that you had in those early years where you was, still, plying your trade and learning along the way?
This question could literally take the rest of the show to try to answer. So I'll give you the no clips of this along the way. I'll try my best. So kind of going back in my career, looking back at it at a youngest age, I really started in computers back in the beginning. I mean, it was almost the beginning. It was 1986 when I started playing with my first computer. It was a Commodore 64. So immediately I just had a passion for what they did. And I'll tell you what this passion partly came from. Combination of both things. My father was a part of the influence on this, kind of getting a computer for me and trying to help me get into this. But the most interesting, and probably the thing that I would tell anyone else here, is a mentor is one of the most important things you can have in your career. And this is at any part of your career. I was very fortunate in high school. There was a instructor that taught electronics in high school. This instructor, he must have seen something in me because he pushed me extremely hard and on challenges that I really would not have ever have thought of. I spent 4 years with this guy. I went through every class he had from ELT 1, Electronics 1 through Electronics 4, all 4 years of high school. He ended up pushing me to go to college. So I started college my junior year of high school. And I started building a computer in my junior year, which would have been in 1988. I built my first computer by hand. I wire wrapped it and I created it. And I fell in love with it. It wasn't a eureka moment of when I started the business, but what it did is it created a passion in me. And that's what I said earlier on. If you have that passion, that's all you need. The passion and hard work will get you to wherever you need to go. You got to be reasonable. You're not going to become a billionaire just because you have passion and you work hard. There's a lot of things that plays into that. Let's be realistic. But the one thing it tells you is when I graduated high school, I even went to a junior college in the beginning. I didn't have a lot of money. Very young and was inexperienced. My parents never went to college. So having that really made it a little more difficult to understand. But what I did do for those first couple of years is he also taught some of the classes at the local college. So he kind of mentored me all the way through the first couple of years until I went to university. But he mentored passion in me. And when I went after school, electrical engineering or electrical engineering technology is what I got my first degree in. And what I did is I went to work for a company that did laser research for NASA. And I took this here and my very first job, and I didn't make a lot of money. It wasn't about money. I was passionate. I wanted to get my hands into a computer and try to interface it to the real world. So, okay, I got to this point. And then what I did at that point is working there, I had an option to write some software for chemical analysis and never really knew how to do it. And no one did back then. Nobody knew how to write much software. There were software engineers out there. They were not like they are today. They were hard to find. You had to write in assembly. You had to write it in C or in BASIC. That was pretty much your only three options, or the ones that people were using at that time. So I did that, and immediately that kind of fell in with the electronics, and it became one to me. It'd be okay, this is the career I want to take. So, I kind of used that as my launch board. So having that mentorship really drove me. And the other part is the entrepreneur part, which is also, Paris, you asked about. That is something that I think is built into someone. You're either an entrepreneur spirit or you're not. Are you a risk taker or you're not? Entrepreneurship is about taking risk. It's a risk and reward. When you're taking the risks of being an entrepreneur, stepping out on your own and having nobody to back you but yourself, or a very small amount of money or people in the beginning, is very difficult. I started my first computer company not long after leaving the company for NASA. And it was scary. I have to say, I was really nervous. I started this company, ended up building it into a $3 million a year revenue company. Keeping in mind, I'm 24 years old, 25 years old at this time. Built this into something where I had 22 employees working for me. It doesn't sound like much compared to today, but as a kid, building this from scratch, got my first SBA loan, learned how to run a business, and it became the moment when I was there, I realized I'm definitely going to do this for the rest of my life. I built this into 3 locations, had these people all working for me. I was a kid, and really learned what it was like. And the fundamental thing that I learned is I know technology. So to be good at the customer experience, you've got to know what they're dealing with. You've got to know not only what they're dealing with behind the keyboard, but also what they're dealing with in their lives that they are trying to accomplish. And you learn a lot when you're dealing with the public, when you're dealing with small businesses. They get very personal very quickly. And you really do learn to be empathetic. And empathy is a very big part of being successful in business. You got to be driven. You got to be hardworking. You got to be a little bit lucky, or actually sometimes quite a bit lucky. But you also have to be empathetic to your customer and put yourself in their shoes, and then you'll be successful. So my eureka moment was probably a combination of having a teacher that kind of drove me, or a mentor at the right time in my life I needed. Then also starting my first company and realizing how hard this is. And if you're going to do it, you better do it and give it all you have. And I did everything I did, and it was successful. I had a very good life because of that.
So Shane, you mentioned earlier about the importance of having a mentor, and early in your career, was that the case? And how important was that in your decision to, go the route of being an entrepreneur, and what were the skills that were required there?
Yeah, absolutely, Paris. I mean, it's probably one of the most important things, especially early in your life, is having a good mentor. If you get an opportunity, really anywhere in your life, I was very fortunate to have an amazing, high school teacher that really mentored me into computers and electronics. And I took that and he stayed with me for many years and helped me in fact, I was friends with him until he passed away about 2 years ago. I mean, 30 years later, we stayed friends. That's how close it was. So I can encourage anyone that has the opportunity to learn from others and someone that's willing to mentor you, you should absolutely take advantage of that if they're the right kind of person to do so.
And when you started your first venture, what was the importance of, taking the skills you had learned in your early career and adapting that into the needs of the customers, and how did you find a USP there?
I learned early on when I started my first business. It was a computer company that did B2B and also B2C stuff, selling computers, networking, and things that you would expect with small businesses. And what you find out very quickly is it's very hard to satisfy the general public. So if you can satisfy them, and it really comes down to being empathetic. People just want to know that they're heard. And this really translates into all aspects of your business. These people that you work with in these companies, no matter how big the company is, they just want to know you're listening and you're trying to help them become successful. If you really put your mindset when you're an entrepreneur or you're an account executive or a sales engineer or part of the CS team, the most important thing you do is be empathetic to your customer and really listen to what they're saying. Don't jump ahead. Don't go right into technology. Don't go right into that. Understand what they're doing and why they're doing it, and they empathetic to their problem. Put yourself in their shoes.
And you was in your early 20s when you started that journey of running your own business. And what were the biggest challenges running, building teams and being responsible for people at such a young age? And what were the biggest lessons you learned at that stage in your career?
Oh goodness, I have to say there were so many, and I think the biggest I had to learn. Being in my mid-20s, I really had no experience in how to run a professional business, a multi-million-dollar revenue generating business. And how do you do that? I didn't understand the accounting, the getting loans for SBA. I had to learn all of that. I had to learn things like I always thought the technology was the hard part. No, not at all. The technology was the easy part. Trying to get people to buy what you sell, to believe in what you believe in, and them to understand your why, and for you to understand your own why. And there's a story behind the why. If you ever watched Simon Sinek, you would probably, definitely should if you haven't, called The Golden Circle. But the thing that you learn the most is when you're working with customers, it's not just about satisfying the customer. It's the customer has to perceive the value in what you're selling. There's going to be times when your software or your hardware or whatever you're selling doesn't work. In fact, in the corporate world, it happens a lot. But as long as you're driving them to a better place, no matter how difficult it is, as long as the end result is a better place for them and you're helping them become successful, you will do that. Doesn't matter if it's a small company, doesn't matter if it's a big company. I learned it early on. It's difficult. It's the hardest part of everything is your go-to-market strategy. Nothing more difficult in my eyes.
And having seen it from the other side of the table, I guess that would have helped you massively in understanding the customer's challenges, right? And being able to see it from a different perspective, not just from the software side, but from the side of the customers and the people using the software daily, what the challenges are, and being able to enhance the products to meet the needs of the changing market.
Absolutely. It really comes back to what I mentioned is if you understand your customer, if you put yourself in their shoes per se, and feel what they feel and put yourself in their shoes. You ever tried to call with your cell phone? Have you ever tried to call and get support for your cell phone? You know how frustrating it is to get someone to pick up the phone and actually help you on a cell phone problem? Or cable TV is another example. That's what people feel like. They feel like you feel when you're calling the cable company trying to get support. Imagine if you if you treated your customers that way. If you were, most companies start out small. Very few start out large. And when you start out small, every customer matters. Every customer. Now, as you grow and you segment your customers, then you can start develop. As we talked about earlier, then you can start deciding where you want to put your customer base and how much you want to spend time with each one. In the beginning, every customer matters. So it's very important that you focus your energy on that and spend as much time as possible with these customers to put yourself in their shoes. Again, going back to empathy.
And when you was building Legem software, what was the challenges you faced in terms of brand awareness compared to other players in the market, and how important was it, going back to what you just mentioned of, making sure that the customer feels that you're listening to them and that they're really getting the most from the products, of course?
Yeah, so I actually started my own customer advisory board in that time. So when I started Legem Software, that software was meant to satisfy a big gap in industry. And this was one of the first, for me, it was my first SaaS-based software that I had written the software myself. And it was back when content management software and collaboration software was pretty much non-existent. There was not many companies out there doing it. There was a handful, but they were really not servicing the small to mid-market. And that's really where my expertise was, because I came from my own hardware networking company. I said, why don't I fill that gap? So part of filling that gap was to write this software and then start building out the stuff. But immediately I realized, being a SaaS-based annual contract, the very first experience is, wow, we have to be better with CS. And we didn't call it CS back then. It was just called working with customers or customer service. But the reality is it's all the same thing. Servicing your customers' needs, creating value. So I started really listening to them. So part of this CAB, the customer advisory board I spoke about, was really a time where I put different people that from each of the different verticals that I sold into, and I got their feedback. And every month we'd have a call, and I would discuss things that they liked about the software, things that they would like to see improvements, and the challenges they faced in the business. This gave me a direct line of feedback. And of course, as we grew, we had other people to do this. But in the beginning, I wanted to hear every customer, and getting that feedback is very important in all aspects of business. It's one of the things that a lot of customers, a lot of vendors don't do with their customers today is get true feedback. They rely upon these NPS surveys and CSAT surveys, which are okay, but they are not the end all to decide how your customers are doing.
And going back to what you mentioned there on the feedback loop, is that something in, the roles that you've led, the teams you've led, is that something that you've been really driving the importance of feedback loops and being able to have that take shape to get the best feedback and improve the product and the service that the customers are having? And have you seen a measurable outcome from running these feedback loops?
Yeah, I have. Different companies, different things. I mean, some of them are more measurable than others. It really comes to when it's your own company. Of course, you can mandate how you want to measure and what you can do. When it's other people's companies or public companies, you have a little bit more of a challenge face. But the end result is there's a lot of different ways to look at what makes an ideal customer, and that's really what this comes down to. Not from a buying perspective, but from a user of your software perspective. So let me extend on that just for a moment. You sell your software into a group of people, and you want to know how are they using it or what are they doing with it. The number one thing you must know is how many times are they actually using your software? How long are they using your software per day, per week, per month? Facebook cares about that. Everyone else cares about that. You have to care. But also, are you also doing the qualitative stuff? Are you asking them questions? Are you saying, what value are you getting out of this software? If your customer can't tell you what value they're getting, and that's not to say that, say you sell widgets and they say, yeah, your widgets work good. Well, that doesn't mean there's value in your widget. It means it works. It does what you say it is supposed to do. But is it creating value for them? Take yourselves and put yourselves in their shoes. Are you really doing something that they can quantify to their boss, to their management chain? If you can't, your software is not valuable enough, and it will not hold up during a recession. It will not hold up during a pandemic. I promise you.
And is there any key initiatives or enablement programs that you've personally driven in the last couple of years that you've really found valuable for the customers?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most important things is there's a couple first, but one of the things I think is valuable and it has to be done well is a customer advisory board. Customer advisory boards are very important because what they do is they allow the customers to feel like they're part of the company. They help with the direction of the software, and they also give you an opportunity to really understand the challenges that your customers are made up of. Your cab should not be made up of just your great customers. That's a huge mistake. It's like put your best customers together so we can all have a party. Well, that's silly. That's not going to do any good. Put yourselves in a position where some of your more challenging customers are on that cab, along with your best customers. And the reason is you want those customers collaborating with each other. One of the things that I did is I put a program in place where they would communicate with each other in real time, where they can share that data in real time with each other. It's risky. If you're not doing your job as a CS organization, you're putting yourself at a lot of risk, putting your worst customer with your best customer. You better make sure you know what you're doing. But the end result is if you're moderating that and you're involved in that process, you will be so successful with those customers because then they will understand, they will open their eyes to what's going on. And they feel like they will be part of making that difference, Paris. It's very important.
And if we look at your early years from running your own business, transitioning into a larger enterprise business, what were the transferable skills that were, immediately known, and what was the skills that you developed along the way that's helped you today in your executive position?
Good question again, and really comes down to this. The things that helped me early in my career when I wanted to transition into the bigger companies was my skill sets. I had a diversified skill set, and what I mean is technology. Now, earlier you heard me say that technology is the least important if you had to look at it, and it's still true. But in the beginning, if you're young in your career, you're not going to have go-to-market experience. You're not going to have 20 years of experience to talk about all the stories. You're going to have to rely upon your technology experience, your ability to write software, your ability to do pre-sales demos, things like this. So in the beginning, I relied upon my skill sets in the technology and really hoped that a company would hire me when I was ready to do this. And I really had a fortune of hitting things at the right time when I moved into that world. And it gave me an opportunity, and I started in the pre-sales world as a pre-sales engineer, which gave me the opportunity to learn the business from ground up from a corporate perspective. I had that entrepreneur perspective in there as well.
And you wouldn't be a stranger to the term. I stumbled into pre-sales, or it wasn't something I left, university with a plan to become. And back in those, many years ago, it wasn't a situation where pre-sales was a well-known, established function, right? So it was probably a situation where you was given, some scope of this is what we want to achieve. Given your skills, we definitely think you could be a huge, addition to the team and bring a lot of value. How did that shape over time what pre-sales was defined as, and how has that over many years really shifted and changed and given more enablement to those in the role?
Yeah, it's changed drastically. I think in the beginning, really, pre-sales was nothing more than a person that could do a demo of the product and understand how to integrate the product, using software capabilities or development capabilities. Really didn't have a high expectation of knowing how to create value, how to do return on investments, how to tie technology to value. Pre-sales has evolved drastically because keep in mind, this was around the year 2000 when I started in the pre-sales organization, pre-sales world. That time was during the dot-com bust. So you can imagine what a perfect time to work in the corporate world. Things were very difficult. Pre-sales were very important, but at that time, they just weren't well defined. So coming from there and looking at almost 25 years later, pre-sales is a very defined market spot. It's quantifiable. There's also expectations of understanding not only the technology, but how do you take that technology and tie it to the value of the customer? How do you tie it to the users? How do you train the users? There's so many aspects of pre-sales that are so important for customers. They're more demanding now than they've ever been, as they should be.
And when we look at pre-sales as a function, many years ago, it's fair to say, the profiles or the people that were doing those roles generally were pretty technical, right? And now, as we look at no code and low code software, it's more focused on being able to tell a unique story that's, bringing value to the customer and being able to, as you mentioned earlier, bring that proof of value to life. And even from my perspective, I guess the emphasis on proof of value is probably more so than proof of concepts. And that's something that's thrown around in the industry pretty much every day. How do you define the difference between proof of value and proof of concept, and how, is that able to bring ultimate value to the customer and drive a successful outcome from both sides?
Yeah, so the pre-sales organizations really have to understand there has been a huge shift from POC or proof of concept to proof of value. This is more recent, by the way, but proof of value makes a lot more sense. Proof of concept basically means you're implementing the software in a way you can prove out that it conceptually works, that it does what you say it will do. But does that mean it creates value for the company? This is the big gap, right? So you're here, right? You're here trying to implement a proof of concept, but the proof of value may be something completely different. Yeah, you've installed the software, you've put it in their sandbox, it's working. What do you do next? What do? You don't know. But a proof of value is you have to extend yourself past the sandbox and say, now, what do I need to do to get to the end goal? Well, if you don't know what the end goal is, if you don't know where value is, how do you get there? This is the thing I tell people today. And I don't care if you're in post-sales or pre-sales. If you don't understand the end game, the value that they're expecting out of this, or the reason they're really buying it, and you should start there and back yourself into that problem. So if you know the value is we're trying to save, $100,000 a year in costs because we're having to cut, some people, and we need more efficiencies in technology. Well, that's your value. So how do you get there with your software or for your hardware? How do you get there? And everything that you do should back in from POV backwards. And the POC would be a point of the POV process. So the POV and POC are interchangeably used, but they're not the same. POV is the entire sales cycle to get them to value. POC is a point in time along that POV. So that's kind of the differences in my eyes.
And if we look towards, the demo stage as it is, how important is that by the time the customer is at that stage to really have a clear picture of what their unique business case is, what the challenges are, and being able to use everything along the way and being well prepared to execute a great demo at the end.
Yeah, it really depends on how much you collect data and how much you listen. Goes back to what I said earlier about empathy, but more than empathy, are you really listening to your customer? And are you listening to the right person at your customer? So here's one of the things that also happens a lot. And I'll give this as kind of a red flag, as I call them, right? Red flag is don't get caught up on listening too much to maybe an engineer that's trying to implement your software. They think it's really cool. They think it's a cool thing to have. Yes, it may be, and we're happy to have that person. And I would call them potentially a champion. Somebody that's there behind you, rah, trying to help you get the software. They're not the ones going to buy the software in most cases. They're not the ones that's going to be the ones signing that check. You need to get to that person. So when you're doing your POV should be aligned to the persona of the buyer, of the actual buyer or the owner. Sometimes the buyer and owners are different people. In either case, those two people are who really matter. If your POV is not proving the value to those two along the way, no matter what else you do, demo or anything else, it will not matter. Make sure every demo you have, every POC you do, make sure it ends with showing value to those two people, the buyer and the owner. And everyone else is just a champion or an influencer at that point.
And sometimes, as you mentioned, the decision maker or the buyer is not always present in those, discussions, those demos. How important would you say it is to have, webinar materials or continuous training material for the customers to be able to go back, review, reference, and really understand more about the product and help to, interest and drive their passion towards that solution?
It's one of the most important things you can do if you want to spread across the enterprise. So first of all, during the pre-sales or during the sales engagement, it's not only your job to do the demo once, you need to enable the person that you're demoing to, if they're your champion, that they know how to demo the product as well as you do. They should be able to talk the track as well as you do. Because if they want to sell it internally, there's a lot of times you as the vendor are not going to be involved. You're not going to be at the customer at the time when this has to happen. So you're literally relying upon the voice of another person. So if you're not continually educating them, and you also have to educate them on competition, you have to understand that they are going to be looking at competitive products. If they're not, someone else will be. In either case, they should be very educated on the pros and the cons of not only your software. And one thing I don't think is healthy is to talk negative about a competitor. But what I do think is you should know the weaknesses of a competitor and know the strengths of your product and show the difference by highlighting your strengths, especially if your strengths are your competitor's weaknesses. Very important. So when you go through this process, you're really guiding that person into being able to go and do this, be the cheerleader for you in the company. They will literally do this for you. I've had this as being one of my most successful things to do when selling software, is to get those champions able to be enabled, to be educated, to go out and disseminate this across the organization. And then from there, it's like a spider web. It goes everywhere.
And I love to talk about enablement, and you mentioned it there when you're talking about the internal champions from the perspective of a customer. How are you able to position those champions with the resources and tools to really champion the product and be, a flag bearer for the success it could bring to the organization?
Some of the things that are kind of obvious, like the assets that one would have, white papers, the things you would give them, demos you would give them, also recording a lot of the work that you do with them, giving them recordings. But also sometimes it's about getting them an opportunity to talk the track back to you, saying, hey, Bob, tell me this. What is the value you perceive in our software? You're the champion. You're going to go talk about this. Sell me on how you're going to go do this. Because believe me, if this person really wants this software inside of their company, they're going to want to know everything possible. So a lot of it is giving them the resources and the materials, but it's more about you working with them to make sure that they have the pitch down. We give them a set of potential questions that may arise during this conversation internally. But just as importantly, if you have the opportunities, go with them. Anytime they will let you, go with them on site, spend your time, go see the customer, and then feel free with your champion, stand side by side, giving a presentation together. And believe it or not, you can do that more often than what you think if you ask.
And from a perspective of face-to-face interaction with the customers, I know since Corona and since, maybe a few years before that, the emphasis was more, moving towards video calls. How important is it to, see eye to eye when you're building those relationships? Would you say it's crucial, or depending on the type of customer, it may be pivotal to build those relationships person to person and face to face rather than over Zoom?
There is nothing better than a face-to-face conversation. I know we all love our Zoom. We can sit in our house or sit in our office and instead of going and flying thousands of miles across the country or the world. But when you shake hands with a person and you see their body language and you see their eyes, and their eyes on Zoom are not the same because they're looking down at the screen, they're looking up, it's not the same kind of connection. Now, once you meet that person, you get established, you shake hands, you go have dinner together or whatever it is you go do. Once you have that friendship, once you have that attachment, then you can do the remote stuff. The remote stuff's great. But if you and it does come down to the type of customer, but there is no such thing as the type of person. Every person prefers, if possible, to look someone in the eyes and say hello. And the people that don't want to is because they probably don't want to take the time to, or they don't want to spend the time with you because your software is not that important to you, or that product is not that important to them. So get in front of them at least one time. Take them out. It's not about what you demo. It's not about how much information you can give them. It's really about the people to people process, the live interaction. That's what it's about.
And from a leadership perspective now, something I always ask the guest is around how they enable their teams to grow, because I guess people come into an organization, especially in the first 6 months, they want to have a clear plan, right, of how they're going to, develop new skills, grow as a person within the organization. How are you able to put together a plan with, new people in the team for them to have, clear growth and know that they're being enabled with the resources to succeed?
Part of it is hiring the right person. So I'm going to step back kind of one step behind that, Paris. When you bring people in the organization, sometimes when you're in a rush to hire, you won't interview as much as you should, and you won't put them through the test that you should. You should always force them to, and I say force is kind of a strong word, but you should always have a step in the hiring process where you see them give a demo, you see them challenge, you give them challenging questions that are live, like you're doing with me right now, live questions, where see how they react to that. Now, once you hire them, by then you're assuming you made a good hire. If you've done all the steps right, and good hires want to learn. So this is the key. Good people that you hire, if they're good and they want to be part of it, they want to learn everything possible. It's your responsibility to give them a track that they can follow for success. And you have to give them the time. So one of the things that I do at every company I hire, I allot 3 to 4 months that they do nothing but learn. And then I'll give them a learning objective week by week. So every week I have a set of steps of things that they have to accomplish each week. Some of those are HR related. Some of those are product related. Some of those are pitch related. Some of those are about how to do a POV. It can be a number of things. It's a mixture of everything to do with the role that I hired them for. And sometimes it's 100 to 120 items is what I see as my average across 6 to 8 weeks and sometimes 12 weeks. But I usually give them about 3 to 4 months. Even though I usually say 12 weeks, we try to give them an extra month because of gaps and vacations and holidays and things like that happen. I don't want to kill someone. But at the end of each week, their manager has to sign off that they accomplished everything. And then they had a set of questions they asked them to make sure they understand it. It's not because we're going to fire them, because if they're not getting it right, we'll have them to retake it. The end result is you must have that in place. Give your people time to learn. Give them that 3 to 4 months, but don't just make it an open book saying, go learn everything you know and come back in 3 months. People don't know what to do. You need to guide them down that path. You need to have checkpoints along the way and make it feel like they graduated. At the end of that, they feel like they've graduated. They're ready. They're ready for their role. And that has been very successful for the times I've done that.
And ownership then must be important in the respect of a leader helping or supporting HR with building that onboarding plan for each, hire, I guess, because you as you mentioned, there's a lot to learn in a short period of time, but you guys are going to be involved of shaping that process to make sure that all of the key aspects are, covered. And if, they failed, and part of that responsibility falls onto the hiring team. So I guess along the way, every hiring manager's made, a hire that maybe they felt, okay, maybe this wasn't the ideal, hire. And what was the biggest learning curves or challenges you faced when, hiring in different stages of your career? Because when you hire for a well-established, well-processed organization, it's going to be very different to a much smaller, maybe more agile business with less processes in place.
Sure. So obviously, as you said, earlier companies, earlier startups, seed companies don't have a lot of process, and you also don't have the opportunity to maybe hire the best skills, the most skilled people. Sometimes you may hire junior people right out of college or people with 1 or 2 years experience. What you want to find then, and because it is difficult to put those people through those rigorous processes, you can, but you have to be much more flexible because typically you can't pay as well when you're a startup. You don't have the money to pay the high dollar thing you can pay at an Oracle or an IBM or a Microsoft. But what you can do is you can offer a lot of incentive. But the most important thing you can do during that process is to make sure you're hiring people who have a lot of energy, that really understand and have great communication skills, and have some basic technology, whatever the technology is you're selling. They need to have some basics of that. But honestly, what you're hiring is personality, drive, ambition, and the ability to execute over time. If you can do those things, if you can hire for those things first, you will be more successful than you would by hiring just a straight great engineer that has terrible communication skills. Those people almost always fail in the end, or they get put in a corner and nobody talks to them. They just sit down and write software. So it's really, really important to focus on those, especially early on in these seed companies.
And when you are in the interviewing process, then do you find curiosity is something that immediately stands out in a candidate, and you can identify if they're the right fit from how curious they are about the product, the organization, and they have well prepared questions? I guess that's a given.
Yeah, agreed. And so when you're first going through this interview process with people, the first thing I look for is people taking the time to really understand what we do, what our company is, and what we're about. Have they taken the time to understand who I am? Have they looked at my LinkedIn to see, or the other whoever they're going to be interviewing with? Have they looked at that person to understand them? Did they understand enough about them? Did they go to their Facebook and see if they have kids? I mean, these things are important because it says a lot. Because you want to go into an interview with as much knowledge as possible as the interviewee. Don't walk in there and just say, "Hey, I know I read the quick website, a couple of links on the website. I feel like I'm good to go." Do you really understand their value? Do you understand their purpose? Do you understand the people you're going to be interviewing with? Do you understand what their goals are? You may not understand everything, but if you listen well and you come prepared with the right questions, and don't ask how much pay I'm going to make, don't ask how many days off I get a year. I mean, don't ask silly questions. I mean, think about it this way. An interview shouldn't be a Q&A. Like, this is kind of a Q&A because of a podcast. But an interview should be a conversation where every side has a question or maybe a comment based on the other person saying. If you can get an interview going that way, where you're driving them by you asking questions back, but they allow them to ask a secondary question, the interview no longer becomes an interview; it becomes a conversation. And when you hang up the phone with that interviewer, the person hiring you, when they hang up that phone, guess what? All they remember is that was a good conversation. And that's the way you want to leave that conversation. That was a fun conversation. That's who gets hired.
And when we look at it in respect to the customer success and the pre-sales roles, their role is to, as you said, be able to have good conversations, right? To be able to uncover the whys and hows. And this is the kind of things that you pick up in those conversations with candidates. So you can immediately start to see if these are the people that are going to have done their research. Because as we discussed earlier on in the conversation, it's all about being well prepared to understand the industry, the customers, the challenges. And it's similar to an interview process, right? You're going to want to know how the hiring manager is as a person, what kind of background they have. Building that rapport with them is crucial in the early stages to remember, to be remembered in the later stages of the process. They'll be like, hey, I remember that guy, he really asked or had those questions that were really resonating with what we're looking for. And I guess something I wanted to move on to is how the hiring needs have changed over time. We look at, the job descriptions of a pre-sales or customer success person 10 years ago was maybe very much technical or focused on support from a customer success perspective. And now it's, incorporating that alongside other things. Would you say that's something you're seeing in your role leading these teams?
Absolutely. In fact, on the pre-sales or the post-sales side, in other words, if you're a technical account manager or you're a pre-sales sales architect, sales engineer, it's the most important thing is I'm seeing where there's a whole bunch of additional bullets requirements. So when I write the job description, it used to be, do they know Java? Do they have Python? Have they ever, written in the middle tier or whatever might be the case? Do they know databases? So these are the kind of things you would have, but they're still there. Those things are still there. But then if you ever look at the LinkedIn and you look at job descriptions today, almost all of them have them as the secondary bullets. And almost on the primary, what do you see? Good communication skills, besides the degree and the things like that they usually ask for, but like good communication skills, ability to cross communicate or cross collaborate, ability to work with customers, understand go to market strategies. This is the art, because you want to know what jobs are going to get replaced in the next 5 to 10 years. Most developers, most people that get their hands on a keyboard. Guess what? The new world of large language models is changing the world for us today. It's going to change it so fast. And people are going to argue, well, we always need some developers. Absolutely. Instead of needing 10, now you need one to do 10 people's jobs. So now you need a software architect to oversee something that you needed 5 developers to do in the past. Now you need one architect. This is the difference. But what Chat GPT, what large language models will never be able to do is learn how to read people, interact with people, and create a human connection. And people buy from humans. They don't buy from machines. No matter what anyone says, that model, and that's why the change you're seeing with pre-sales and post-sales people, that's why we're wanting more of those kind of people, because this is getting harder and harder to sell software. There's so much competition. There's so little time for people. And you really have to have people that can hit home fast, hit hard fast, and be empathetic and get in the business as quickly as possible and understand the customers. And you don't get that by knowing Java or by knowing Python.
Definitely. And if we go back as a summary of your career, then what would you say has been the biggest lessons that you've learned? Because we all know, the successes are not always claimed, or everyone wants to claim them, but the failures, most people stay away from or pass the buck on that. What would you say is the biggest lessons you've learned, and how was you able to, remedy that and grow and enable your team on the back of what you've learned in your career?
Well, different parts of my career, I've learned different things, but probably the one or two biggest things that I've learned from a leadership perspective, and then I'll go into an individual perspective because they're two different things. From a leadership perspective, in the beginning, I thought a manager was someone that had to they manage process, they manage the things that people are told people what to do and how they should do them, and exactly when, where, what, how. The problem with that is that's a manager. The difference is something called a leader. A leader is something much different. It took me many years of my career to learn this. Leadership is giving people the ability to make decisions and make mistakes and learn from those and still support them and help them. And most importantly is you as a leader be willing to do whatever you ask your people to do and be able to do it as well as they do, or at least somewhat as well. And another part of that is to recognize as a leader that you are not going to be the best at everything. You hire the right people and enable them to do their job and do it well. That's the thing I learned as a manager is don't be a manager, be a leader. We don't need any more managers in this world. There's too many now. Leadership is very hard. Being a leader is very hard because it requires empathy, caring, understanding, and listening to your people and making them empowered. And that's something that anyone that's ever worked for me, especially in my latter career, all of them would say the same thing. That's what I do well. Now, let's go back a few years to my personal. Is years ago interrupted way too much. I didn't listen. I was only listening to say, what should I say next? I couldn't wait to respond, interrupt people. It's terrible. If you don't listen, you're not learning from people. If you're not listening to what they're truly saying, you're not learning anything. You're just waiting to say when you can speak again. And to me, this goes back to the 80-20 rule. 80% of your time should be used listening to others and 20% talking. And I think early on, I finally did learn that. It took a long time. It takes a lot of mistakes. It takes a lot of bad things happen. Bad things in your career happen because you don't listen well and you interrupt and you make other people feel unimportant. That's a change that you should make early in your career. Do it immediately. Learn that. Learn to be empathetic. I said that empathetic word probably 15 times during this podcast, and I mean it. It's so important. So those are kind of the two things that takeaways from me, Paris.
That's amazing. And just lastly, before I dive into a question from the last guest, I want to ask you, in terms of personal learning, how important is that to continue learning as a leader and, be involved in mentoring and coaching others? How pivotal is it for yourself, and what have you been able to take away from that?
Yeah, I'll start with the learning piece. Learning is ongoing forever. I'm a passionate learner. I read books every month. I read constantly. I do the Udemy courses. I got advanced education, went back to college a couple of different times for more things. I can't tell you enough how important it is to not only learn in a formal way, but to learn from people everywhere. Learn the good and the bad, even for people that you meet in your world that you do not want to be like, or you see things bad about them. Don't need to call them out. Learn from them. Learn the things that they did well. Learn the things that they do poorly. And when you see the bad things, you see someone that is interrupting or is doing things. It's not your job to correct them unless you're their mentor, but it is your job to learn not to be like that. So learn in all aspects of your life, from personal to business and all their parts. Now, the other piece of this is not just about learning, but mentoring. Mentoring is very important. And I think this is something you do as you get older. You want to share your knowledge with others. The reason I'm on this podcast is for that reason only. I enjoy sharing my knowledge with other people. It's fun. I have fun with this. So mentoring, look for a mentor if you don't have one, and be a mentor if you're able to do so in whatever your expertise is. Always.
And a question I have, as I mentioned earlier from a previous guest, is something that I'm sure will be an interesting question for you. And it's throughout your career, where was the biggest point where you had to relinquish control and pass on responsibility to the team, and how hard was it in those days to relinquish control and rely on the team to meet the objectives and drive growth?
So this is a very good question, and it's a very hard question to answer. And I'll tell you, the reason for this is I was young and I had started one of my companies, and I've started 3 different companies in my career. And one of these companies it was growing really fast. It was a software company. It wasn't Legion. It was another company, but it was growing very fast. And what I realized is, for this company to grow at the level that it had to grow, I had to trust the vice presidents that I had hired. And I was so in the weeds with everything. I was involved in development. I was messing around the sales organization. I'd even go over to operations and try to fix operations. And what I did is I wanted to be part, and I didn't just want to direct or understand. I wanted to get on the keyboards and take over for people. And there's nothing worse. This goes back to that style of being a manager. That's being a manager. That's a horrific thing to do. So this started early on as giving up that control as the founder is one of the most difficult things. And it's also the thing that causes a lot of companies to fail. Startups, the reason the majority of startups fail, because the people that are the founders in many cases don't have the operational skill sets to be a CEO. They're founders of the software. They built software. They had a great idea. But to be a CEO or to be a chief customer officer, those are unique roles. You cannot be everything. Pick your role, become great at it, and do it. And don't try to do everything. And giving up that control is just part of it. Trust your people. If you don't trust them, why would you hire them? Why would you want them working for you? Do you want to give your money to someone you don't trust? So if you do trust them, trust them. Help them if they make mistakes, be understanding, direct them, and make them better. And also realize you make a lot of mistakes along the way as a leader. And as a CEO or whatever position you are, you will make tons of mistakes. It's a promise.
I agree. And something before I ask you for a question to share with the next guest, what I wanted to dive into a little bit is soft skills. Is that something that you believe can be taught? Many people say it's either you have it or you don't, but I'm a believer that it's something that can be taught and developed. Is that something you agree with? Or
I do agree with Paris. I think it comes down to the kind of person. If you're an extreme introvert, the chance of you having good soft skills is going to be somewhat limited. So you have to look at yourself as a person and say, really, who am I? And you need to understand, or if you're an extroverted person, or if you're a person that's maybe an introverted extrovert, if you have the ability to speak, you have soft skills past that point can be learned. I don't think you can overcome them if you're a true introvert, because it's super, super hard for those kind of people to talk to others. But with that being said, soft skills can be improved. Everyone has some communication skills. I remember, and I'll be very quick here, but I remember when I was young, and I was bashful when I was young. I was very shy. When I go back to my elementary education years, it's just the way I grew up. I grew up in a world where you just didn't speak a lot, so I was very shy. And I remember the eureka moment, as you call it, is I was working for a company, and they said and I didn't know this, they were recording us in this room, and I was a pre-sales engineer. So this was a little bit later, early mid-career. And I was a pre-sales engineer. They were recording us, and they had us to do what I call a dramatic act. So they said, get up and do something dramatic. And there's a room of 30 people. What do you do? I just got up, I stood up, they said, be as dramatic as you want. I jumped up, I slid across the office table, slid across the right in front of the guy, and I said, "You need this," just like this. You need this. And the CEO of the company was watching. This was a 4,000 person company. He was watching this. They came and they pulled me after that meeting was over. They came and promoted me to a different role because of that, because I was willing to step up and do that. So I think those eureka moments happen in all our careers, and it's very fun. So I hope that answers your question.
It definitely did, and it takes me to talk about that element of stepping outside of your comfort zone, right? Sometimes you have to do things that you're not used to, but that's how you elevate and learn more. And just before we go into the quick fire questions, Shane, just wanted to ask you, there was a question that you could pass on to another executive from customer success or pre-sales. What would be something that you would love to hear about and hear their perspective on?
Yeah, I definitely. How will the evolution of artificial intelligence, how do you think it's going to affect the customer experience? So do you think that the CS organizations are going to evolve with AI? Or do you think AI is going to replace CS? And if so, in what ways?
Interesting question. I've got my views, but as I said, I still think there's always going to be an element of personal touch involved. But I will ask that to the next guest. And just lastly on the quick fire question. So my first question to you, Shane, is going to be a common one. What would you say is your favorite food?
Indian, for sure. Butter chicken.
Yes, mine too. And if we talk about your favorite routine in the morning, is there something that you do every morning that's important to your mental health, or to get up and start the day great?
Get up and make the bed. I do it every morning. The reason I do it is not because usually there's no one else here, or maybe my wife at the most. You know why I do it? Because it helps me start my day with organization, and I keep my day going from there. Always.
And what would you say is the biggest skill for somebody that's moving into technology, whether they're a recent graduate or, just looking for an industry change? What would you say is the biggest skill that they could develop?
I think I've mentioned it throughout the whole podcast, which is really to put yourselves in the shoes of whoever you're talking to, albeit an employer, a customer, whatever the case. So improve your communication skills, improve your soft skills. Your technology skills will come naturally. They just happen. It's not hard to get those.
And I know you've lived in a few different places. What would you say is your favorite state and why?
By far, Florida. Why? Well, weather for one, no taxes, another, plenty of freedom to do what I want. And also it's a very, very clean state. Now there's also negatives in Florida, of course, but in general, I just wake up feeling happy with the sunshine. So this is where I love to live.
That's great. And I haven't been Florida yet, but I'm sure to take the kids there to Disneyland. And if you've got any suggestions, Shane, throw them out to me. I'm sure the audience would like to hear them as well. And just last but not least, I want to say thank you, Shane, for your time, your amazing comments and overview into the industry, customer success, pre-sales, and what it takes to really be successful and grow from the front. So again, Shane, thanks from the bottom of my heart, and I'm sure we'll have you on another episode.
I appreciate it, Paris. I've really enjoyed this, and thank you to all of you. I hope this helps you in your careers for the people that are listening. And no matter if you're later in your career or early on, I think there's a little bit of value in both. As far as here in Florida, Clearwater Beach, definitely need to check that out. Disney World, if you have children, of course. Jacksonville, there's a really quaint place up in Jacksonville, Florida you should check out. And if you need more, drop me an email, and I'll definitely give you a list of places to go here in Florida. Tons to do.
Amazing. Well, everyone that's listening, be sure to connect with Shane. If you have any questions, I'm sure he'd love to help you on your journey. Take care, everyone, and be sure to tune in to the next episode of SaaS Leaders Lounge. Take care. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.